Welcome back, fellow dissidents. After a long absence, the first topic of discussion must be demoralization. My last video, approximately 4 or 5 months ago, was uploaded in the hopes that using a United States congressman on the floor speaking about COVID could help to deter any censorship. Well, for whatever naivety that I must have displayed, that was obviously wrong, as I did in fact, it did in fact entail another act of censorship by YouTube, and there was really nothing more that I could have done to have stopped it. I tried my best to speak on the COVID regime in a manner that was dissident, of course, because I highly disagree with all of the policies, but also in a manner that would deter censorship. I figured that since it was widely being spread, the talk by Rand Paul on the floor of the U.S. Congress, that I could, in fact, add my own viewpoints on top of it, and this would deter censorship. Now, the entire length of the episode that I uploaded is still there, but one of my SOD clips was in fact censored and pulled down, and at that point I had 2 hard strikes. So if you incur 3 hard strikes in a 90-day period as per the terms of service of YouTube, they will yank your channel down. Now, my initial reaction was to just wait the 90-day period and then start back up again. Well, in the course of 3 months, and I've had 4 or 5 strikes or warnings or whatever have you. It's fairly demoralizing. I'm starting to gain traction when it comes to the presence on social media and such, but gaining traction on YouTube is nearly impossible. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just continue what I have been doing and what I've set out to do, and be a dissident voice for anarchists and libertarians alike. And if YouTube wants to yank me down, so be it. I'll continue on Rumble, and hopefully we'll gain traction there. I've got a little under 1,000 in my community on Facebook. I've got a little over 300 on my community on Twitter, and I just broke 1,100 on Instagram. So while I'm still fairly insignificant in terms of social media, I'm going to continue to prosper the best that I can, because in all of the intellectual philosophy and political economy and just conjecture in general when it comes to political economy and philosophy, the best thing that people can do, in my opinion, is to change people's minds, perception. If everybody today or tomorrow were to agree that we need to abolish government, the government would no longer cease to be a factor. So that is what ultimately pushes me forward. Now given it is extremely demoralizing when you're speaking to folks about these ideas and you're consistently shut down. I mean, like I said, I don't even remember how many times I'd have to look, but YouTube has stricken me down over and over again, even while I'm tiptoeing around these ideas. And a lot of the things that I'm saying are things that prominent people are saying as well, but they have a large enough group of people watching them that if they were to say it and be censored, there would be a large backlash and a larger ramification surrounding YouTube and their censorship. Now, there's no secret in the fact that YouTube and Google and all of the big tech oligarchs are engaged in censorship. Anybody who's watching the narrative unravel in real time understands that censorship is a real thing. But it's just like any typical oligarch that is engaged in suppression of dissidents. The harder and faster they push, the more the dissidents gains traction, right? So while somebody of my stature can easily be suppressed, somebody of the likes of Dave Smith or Tim Pool or whoever, take your pick of political commentators, they can't just as easily just be yanked down. And you know that the censorship is arbitrary, because the last video that I uploaded, the entire episode is still in fact up. But one of the SOD clips entitled 2 weeks to flatten the curve it was called 2 weeks to flatten the curve to mandates and passports. That was the name of it. It got yanked down, I'm pretty sure, just off the basis of the title alone. But it's true. We went from the government and their commentators and ideologues saying that we needed to all shut down for 2 weeks to now we're over 2 years past that 2 weeks, and they're still going on about this, this COVID regime and this absolute pandemic that's raging. Not given, since the attack on Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine, it has subsided. But I mean, anybody who is naive enough to think that this is all just going to go away, that is in fact naive. I mean, sure, they have shifted their ideologues and their narrative to, suppress ideas in the fact of international and, foreign policy affairs. But we got midterms coming up in November. Trust and believe that before, during, or after the regime change, which is looking like it's inevitable at this point, that there will be more COVID regime, regardless of who's in Congress or otherwise. Now, having said all that, that's where the pause in my content and the initial demoralization came from, because it was quite obviously arbitrary. I can put up the entire episode, including the whole context, but when I clip a piece and put it on social media, YouTube yanks it down, because something that sensationalizes the COVID regime is obviously not acceptable to the big tech platforms. Now, having said all that, I just want to, continue to address the problems at hand, and a lot of the narrative right now surrounding whether it be the COVID regime or the foreign affairs ad infinitum is in fact economic. Everything is being blamed, excuse me, on Putin. And while foreign affairs obviously have domestic ramifications, we cannot very well blame Putin for everything that's going on. And that's not to say, I already know that my stance, I've seen it on social media and other commentators as well. If you say anything that goes against the narrative of Putin equals Hitler, then you are a Putin apologist, or you're backing Putin or something to that effect. And that's fine. I'm ready for the backlash. I couldn't care less. I mean, my stance as an anarchist gets me pushed back from all sides anyways, so I couldn't possibly care less. But the fact remains that the history of Ukraine and Russia is much more detailed than just the last couple months, let alone the fact that there was a regime change and a coup d'etat backed by the CIA in 2014 and the quote-unquote color revolution, right? The CIA and the U.S. federal government has been known to back regime change that are putting in Western-friendly presidents or whatever kind of leader in that country so happens to be. And there's no exception in the case of Ukraine. Zelensky was a pro-Western president for Ukraine. And according to the Minsk agreements, they weren't supposed to go east of Russia. And now they're all the way past the Baltic states, right up on the border of Russia. So it's not to justify Putin's invasion. That is absolutely detestable, and he is, there's no way around it. He's a dictator, and he's engaged in absolutely abhorrent behavior. But that does not mean that it's not rational. People think that he's just Hitler-esque and that he's doing this irrationally. That there's no justification for what he is doing. I will say that much. But that doesn't mean that he's not acting rationally. When NATO continuously pushes onto his what he considers to be originally sovereign to Russia, he's going to act accordingly. But to say this now in today's climate is it's basically they'll call you a fascist, and they'll call you at a minimum a Putin apologist and all this, and it's all rhetoric. Most of these people are just they're NPCs. They're just supporting the popular thing that their ideological oligarchs are telling them to. And it's like we see the COVID regime slowly pulling back their policies, and making the opposition being to that of Russia, which we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years. The entire the Russiagate narrative has become unraveling, and everything has been tied to Russia for this purpose. For when they push hard enough against Putin that he retaliates, whether justified or unjustified, now they have a large political backing in the Western world, where everybody looks at Putin as, oh, it must be his fault. There's such a hysteria and an agenda behind it. It's absolutely atrocious. These people they couldn't even point, well, maybe now they could point to it on a map, because it's been a couple months and people have been saying, hey, show me Ukraine on a map, and people couldn't do it. So now they could. But this is just I support the current thing. I'm sure you've seen the meme. It's non-player characters who have been trained to espouse the ideology of their oligarchs. Plain and simple. And, it has provoked me to want to get back into talking about this, because sure, I was demoralized. I mean, who wouldn't be? I've set up all this time and effort, and I put in all of this effort to read into philosophy and all of this stuff. I put so much time and effort into this just to continuously be yanked down and to be told, oh, one more step, you encroach on our rules one more time, which are arbitrary anyways, and we're gonna yank your whole thing down. Well, yank it down, because most of my term of service policy restrictions, or whatever you want to call it, whatever I have done to encroach on the terms of service of YouTube, have been, in fact, about COVID policy. And now most of what I have said is relegated to the mainstream. Most people are accepting this. Masks are basically fucking pointless. They do absolutely nothing, and almost all of that's getting rolled back. I said that passports were, vaccine passports were absolutely abhorrent, and that they do nothing to help the restriction or stopping COVID at all. All of these things that I said that got me yanked down prior are now part of the mainstream. There's almost no vaccine passports in effect today. So everything that I said was for naught. Yeah, I mean, it's now accepted. So I'm going to continue to do this. And should YouTube feel it necessary, they can pull my entire channel down. That's fine. I'll create a platform elsewhere. It's just fairly demoralizing. Plus, I've had a lot of other things personally that are going on that are rather demoralizing as well. But that's neither here nor there. But the state of what's going on in this country has to be addressed. I don't care how small or how big the platform is. There's enough people that are starting to accept that this two-party system and this democracy and all this stuff that's touted as the ideal of Western civilization as we see it is obviously not the case. It just can't be. If you look at it logically, even Trump, I mean, sure, his socialistic policies, which are in fact the case. People often tout his foreign policy and his economy as the two saving graces of his presidency, when in reality his foreign policy was to continue the U.S.-backed genocide in Yemen. And sure, there was agreements, and he engaged in setting up the pulling out of troops in the Middle East, but that's neither here nor there. He was still engaged in dropping bombs in Syria and sanctions and backing Yemen genocide. Okay, so foreign policy, absolutely abhorrent, and he's a war criminal and belongs in Gitmo. All right, so there goes that. And then his economic policy, all he did was redistribute in a fashion that was rather than with the normal establishment, the neocon and neoliberal establishment who does it internationally to their cronies, he just did it to his cronies here in America. So it made it seem like that the economy was roaring. Best numbers in our time is what they said. but it was still an unprecedented amount of inflation by proxy of the Federal Reserve, and he just did it to his cronies here in America to make the economy seem like it was roaring. He's a nationalist. A lot of people find this as a good thing to uphold, nationalism, and it's not. It's just, that is fascism. When you, it's the lucrative merger of corporation and state. So technically, when people say Trump is a fascist, they're right. Our entire government is it's a neoliberal and neo-fascist state. That's exactly what it is. There's no two ways about it. Now it's a newer version of it. So the Western world and the American fascism isn't the same as Mussolini and Italy back in the early 20th century. It's not the same kind of fascism. These oligarchs and this federal system has learned to evolve, and it gets even more support today. You put a guy in with populist sentiments, nationalist sentiments, and says that he's going to drain the swamp and lock up his political opposition, and you get a large amount of dissidents who are willing to support the state again. And that's what we see with Trump. And who knows what's going to happen? The next election, more than likely, he's going to be back in it, right? It's either going to be him or DeSantis, and both of them are pro-Israel. They're both pro-Federal Reserve. It's sure. God, it goes without saying. Sure, it's better than the Democrats. The Democrats are trying to burn the entire thing to the ground, which, some people think there's an argument for that because then we get to restart from new. But nevertheless, that's obviously hyperbole. I don't want the entire system come crashing to the ground because that's going to precipitate something. But most folks don't understand what's going on. If you've been paying attention and listening to the news on both sides, you see that both sides are engaged to some extent in redistribution and inflation, and that means manipulating the monetary supply. We're not talking about rising prices. That is a side effect of inflation, but both sides do it. They both have different rhetoric, but it's the establishment. Sure, Trump stands against the neoliberal establishment as it is, but that does not mean that he is anything more than a redistributionist through the proxy of the Federal Reserve. None of this should be upheld. And I guess if your choice is one or the other, then sure, you'll take the red wave in Congress in November, and come 2024, you'll take a Trump presidency. But that's not just your two options. You have the option of abstaining. You have the option of laissez-faire. You have the option of libertarianism and radical libertarianism at that. It's not just the two-party system. That's not your only two choices, and choosing a lesser evil is still choosing an evil. That is what provokes me to do this. That is what makes me want to talk to folks, because talking to folks and promulgating ideas that will take hold in the sentiment in people makes me want to continue doing it. Because I have been convinced that less government would at least, let's say that my anarchist ideas are wrong. There is not any doubt in my mind that more liberty is the answer. Say minarchists are right and we need some amount of government, which I disagree, right? But say they are right. That still means the abolition of the federal government at a minimum. Even Republicans espouse the idea of less government, and that sentiment is correct. To say that we need a Trump presidency is just to adhere to the system in some other form or fashion. And the Democrats aren't necessarily wrong when they say that you're a fascist. If you agree with this, most people think his economic policy was just great. No, it wasn't. He just redistributed the inflation here, so it takes longer. Most of the inflation that we're seeing in the last 18 months was from the prior administration. Now we're starting to see more of Biden's inflation and his redistribution, so it's exacerbating way worse, and plus we're not energy independent, and that affects every part of the economy. So obviously all of that is taking hold, but it's not ideal to back the side that's going, just a little bit slower than the Democrats, because you're still backing an ideology and a regime who is not in your best interest. They appeal to it as if that is the case, but it's not. So my objective is to get back into the swing of things and just get back to talking about news and politics as I was before, but I had to address the sentiment of the demoralization that I had been going through, because it's disheartening when you start to gain even just a little bit of traction, and people are starting to agree, and you can pull people into this libertarian world, and even if they're just more libertarian than they were before, that's a win in my book, because you're pulling people away from the statist ideology that is acceptable, and that includes Trump, that includes the Republicans, that includes everything. Now, other people agree with using the political mechanisms as a form of change, as in electing libertarians and such, and that's fine. I'm a contributor to the Mises Caucus. I agree with what they're doing, because they promulgate the same ideas that I espouse. So I would like to see some form of backing for that. But the main change is going to come in the sentiment, in the ideas of the public. So for me to, if I honestly believe that these ideas will revolutionize not only our economy but our people and worldwide, if people choose to accept it, then I have to continue to spread these ideas. And allowing oligarchs at big tech platforms to hinder that is not acceptable in my eyes, because I can continue to do this. Rumble will host this content. If I need to, I can pay a few dollars a month to go to Locals or Odyssey or whatever. There's really no reason that I haven't already talked myself out of for not doing this, right? So, bottom line, we're back at it. State of dissidence, laissez-faire live, with radical libertarianism, anarchism. We're back at it. We'll catch you on the next one.